Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Missing Bride. Chapter 1. Ever since she was a little girl, Sally Wilhelmsen dreamt of adventure. Though she grew up in Boston, one of her grandfathers was from Scotland, and before he passed, he told her of his many adventures around the world, from the Amazon basin to the Arctic. One memory in particular stood out in her memory. She was just 9 years old, but she remembered everything clearly. His wingback chair was made of deep brown leather and tufted every few inches. The mantel on his fireplace was impressive, especially to a little girl. It was made of mahogany, and carved with all sorts of scrolls, designs, and animals. Her favorite was the lion's head at the center. Sally's mother thought it looked too fearsome, but it reminded Sally of her grandfather. It had one broken tooth and what looked to her like a great big smile. Her grandfather was always smiling around her, only later did she hear stories of his ferocious temper. Her little, overstuffed chair had been made especially for her, and in this memory, she sat beside him, but in such a way that she could still look him in the eye. "Tell me the story of the Arctic again, Papa," she had said. "Ah, my wee one, course I will." His hands, gnarled by arthritis, ruffled her hair. Her mother hated that Sally's hair always looked like she'd been in a hurricane when she was with him, but secretly, Sally loved it. "Tell me about when you had to eat a man," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Well, now, you know your mama doesn't like that story," he said. Her bottom lip quivered. He let out a belly laugh, the one she dearly loved to hear. "Very well, now. Just on go tellin' her I told ye, all right?" And then he started his story. Sally latched onto every word, feeling like the most privileged child in the world. Years later, it had taken Sally a long time to recover from her grandfather's passing, but even then, her papa left her something to remember him by. He'd set aside a bit of money for his favorite grandchild, which caused a great stir among the rest. But the best thing he left her was the pocket watch he had taken with him on his adventures. The old gent claimed that through all those years, it was never lost or broken. It became his good luck charm. And now, it was hers. It was gold, and it was likely worth a great deal of money. The cover was engraved in a nautical theme, complete with a mermaid. This fact did not set well with Sally's mother. In truth, when her mother heard the watch had been left to her daughter, she nearly fainted, and her dutiful husband administered smelling salts. Sally's mother and her grandfather had never been very close. Adventurers don't spend much time with their families, after all, and when Sally had been born, it seemed that all the love Sally's mother felt had been denied to her had been lavished on her little girl. It was a sore spot the mother and daughter never did sort out. It looked silly, a man's watch hanging from Sally's dainty waist, for she had no man's pocket to place it in, but no one dared say a word to her about it. That watch meant more to her than anything in the world, and she wore it every day. It also sat on the nightstand by her bed every night. The only time she didn't have it on her was when she bathed. Every time Sally's mother saw that watch, which was frequently, her right eye would twitch. It was most unbecoming. Today, Sally turned the watch over and over in her hands as she rode in a carriage to her destination. If Sally's parents knew what she was up to, she'd never hear the end of it. They never understood her adventurous soul and were forever looking for ways to civilize her. She kept trying to tell them it was a losing battle, but her mother was one determined woman. That was why, when Sally hatched her big plan for freedom, the only way to avoid possible interference, at least in her mind, was not to tell anyone. This plan had been in the works for some time. Months earlier, she had contacted the Heavenly Doves matchmaking service and told them she wanted to head out west. She needed a good husband who would appreciate her free spirit. Ever since Papa had died, there was no one left in the world who did. The service put her in touch with the only woman agent they had in the field, Margaret Roberts. Sally hadn't heard of Landy City, Nebraska, but if it was good enough to draw a woman from New York, it would be good enough for her. Sally was introduced to a few potential suitors. None of them worked out. They were too interested in practical matters and having a wife to work on the farm. Sally didn't mind the concept of work, but if the arrangement meant she could never leave town, the relationship was out of the question. Besides, she refused to marry a man who had nothing in common with her. One man in particular rubbed her the wrong way from the start. In his letter, which had to be dictated, as he didn't see the value in book learning, he stated that he wanted the following: good birthing hips, strong back, good eyesight, and all her teeth and hair. Once Sally recovered from the initial shock, she burned his letter in the fireplace, taking care to poke at it with extra vigor, using the fire irons to do so. Wasting no time, she wrote directly to Margaret, informing her she was not a prized mule. When Margaret found out about Sally's unsatisfactory experience, she lost no time in severing ties with the man, and his name was never brought up again. After the third try, Sally was about to give up, but Margaret was not known to let go so easily. By this time, the ladies had gotten to know each other quite well. Sometimes, they exchanged letters just to chat. Sally would tell her about her grandfather, and Margaret would tell Sally about life out in Nebraska. It was strange, but even though they'd never met, they both felt as though they had known each other for years. Sally's quest had become an obsession for Margaret, and it became the field agent's personal quest. One day, when Margaret helped her husband, Lawrence, by depositing that week's revenue at the bank, she struck up a conversation with Nelson Thatcher. He'd been the town banker for about 5 years. He didn't look the stereotype of a banker, his hands were calloused, his bearing was strong, and his physique was perfection. Nelson was never one to sit back and let the tellers do all the work. He helped when he could and did all manner of things for people in the Landy City area. Many farmers owed him their livelihoods, especially after the locust swarm that summer. He loaned and forgave late payments when others gave them nowhere to turn. For example, when Clarence had all but given up hope back when the locusts destroyed most of his crops, his wife Carrie entreated him to speak with Nelson for help. Clarence had been a hard-working man, proud and prudent. Some called him miserly. His life had changed a great deal since he married his bride at the start of summer. It had taken only a little convincing, and he was at the bank, hat in hand. "Hello there, Clarence. I've been thinking of you," said Nelson. "Oh. Yes. I heard what happened. Yeah. I heard that you paid your hands, then took care of what debts you could. That's more than most farmers did in your position. It's sad how one farm escaped unscathed, while another was devastated." Clarence still hadn't looked up from the floor. This was likely one of the hardest things he'd ever done, and Nelson knew that. "Tell you what, why don't you step outside with me, and let's talk about what we can do together. How's that sound?" At last, Clarence looked up at him. The tough old bird had tears rimming his eyes. "Just doing this for Carrie, you know." Nelson led Clarence out the door and into the sunshine. No one but Nelson and Clarence knew what deal had been struck. That was just how Nelson was about such things. Margaret knew all of this about him, of course, but she had no idea there was still something missing in his life. "Hello, Margaret. How's business going?" he asked her from behind the counter. "Lawrence's store? Well, he's doing just fine. Glad to hear it. Actually, I was inquiring about your work." Margaret halted what she was doing to look up at him. "It's fine, but I have a client who needs to find a groom." "You don't say?" "I do say." "Nelson, are you trying to tell me something?" "Me? Oh, well, may I speak with you after closing time today?" "Of course. I always have time for you." Nelson wiped the traces of sweat from his brow and hoped no one noticed. It was easy for him to chat with customers and people who needed his help, but when it came to women and courting? That was a different story. Suddenly, he needed some air. He excused himself and walked out back. The humid, hot air hung like a wet fever cloth. Even so, Nelson found himself shivering. Could he do this? Really? There was a haze hovering in the air. That was the humidity at work, of course. Good for the crops, but not great for a man standing around in a suit. At least when he was busy working, it took his mind off things. There was always an unending amount of work to keep him occupied. He found his mind wandering to thoughts of having a family of his own. A happy, contented wife, and happy, healthy children filled his mind. He wasn't the sort to keep his wife at home, knitting, unless that's what she wanted, of course. If she wanted to learn banking with him, he was all for it. If charity work interested her, he would support that. Really, any pursuit would be acceptable to him. It would fill his world with love, laughter, and joy. If that were to become a reality, he'd need help. He knew that. Yes, he could do this. After the bank closed that day, he spoke with Margaret about finding a mail-order bride. Sally knew after Nelson's first response to her letter that he was the one she wanted to spend her life with once she reached Nebraska. This began a brief but wonderful correspondence between the two, with each pouring themselves into their letters. Sally held on to his letters and kept them close to her, especially now as she was on her way to the train station. His first letter spoke of his search for a free spirit and a kindred soul. Her heart leapt at his words, written in perfect script. This was an educated man, and someone who wouldn't trap her at home. Of course, she was filled with questions as she wrote her responses, first to him, and then to Margaret. Sally was prone to verbosity in her writing, though her parents had drummed this tendency out of her speech. 6 pages later, she had decided to wrap up Nelson's letter before starting Margaret's. She told him of her passion for travel, for adventure, and for life. She discussed at length her struggles against oppression from her parents, and, of course, about her beloved grandfather. She even included her best attempt at a sketch of the old adventurer, based on a miniature she had sitting on her bedside table. Her letter to Margaret was uncharacteristically brief and to the point. "He's the one, I just know it," comprised the essential message. From there, the two lovebirds wrote one another just twice each before a decision was reached. The fact that no one else in the house knew about these letters made them even more precious to Sally. Her parents would never understand, let alone approve. No, it would be best to proceed with caution, she had decided. More recently, Sally had found a note from her papa. He had written it in his even hand and folded it so small that it fit in the secret compartment he had made inside the watch case. It said, "My darling girl. All your life, people will tell you that you can't. I know you can. We both do, don't we, my wee adventurer? I'll be on my own adventures in heaven soon, but I'll still watch over you. I love you, Sally. Papa." After Sally read this, she shed tears. Then, she dried those tears, folded the note, placed it back in the compartment, and made her decision. She would be Nelson Thatcher's bride. That same night, she wrote to Nelson, telling him that she loved him and wished to be his bride. Today, sitting in her carriage, Sally's fantasy was becoming reality. She left a note with the maid and asked her to deliver it to her father at lunchtime. That would give her the head start she needed. The poor maid didn't know any of the details. Sally made sure to mention this fact in her note. No need to fire the woman who'd worked for them so long. At last, Sally reached the train station. It loomed over her, casting long shadows across the road. A shiver ran through her body, but she attributed it to nerves. This was it, she would never see this city again. Unbeknownst to anyone, Sally had withdrawn the funds her papa had left. She was unaccustomed to carrying so much money on her person, but her excitement overrode any real worry. Sally felt this money would give her more chances to go on little adventures without burdening their regular budget. Once a porter had been called, and her bags and her trunk were ready to go, she purchased her ticket and headed for the train. Chapter 2. Nelson Thatcher was in love. He might not have said so directly, but most people who knew him could tell something had changed. It wasn't that he wasn't always pleasant, he was, but now he had a faraway look in his twinkling blue eyes and the silliest grin on his face. If it were possible, it made him even more charming. The days passed, one after another, in quick succession for him, yet the arrival date of his love seemed far away. Work kept him busy, of course, and his daydreams kept him company. Nelson already knew how the moment they met would look. Sally's beautiful red hair and brown eyes would light a flame in his heart as he caught her in his arms. He'd caress her apple cheeks and press her face to his, just to breathe in her scent. He lost a great deal of productivity to these daydreams, and while no one complained, it bothered him. In the meantime, Nelson kept himself occupied as best he could. He would go to Steele and Dunlap's on Thursdays and Fridays, and to Little Nellie's kitchen on Saturdays. He did this not only to eat but to socialize. On occasion, people in town invited him to their homes, which was nice. Nelson made a habit of visiting Sheriff Thackeray's family for Sunday dinners. Thackeray and Willa had been married some months ago, and now that they'd had some time to work things out, Willa was not only happy, but she was also an excellent mother to Thackeray's adopted son, Tom. The poor boy had lived a rough and tumble life, and the sheriff had grown so tired of hauling him into his office that he'd finally decided to adopt the boy. The child still got into plenty of trouble, of course, but he was learning about the finer points of civilized livin', that was how Tom liked to describe it. One Sunday, Nelson chatted with Thackeray and Willa after supper was over and the kitchen was clean. Everyone felt comfortable, everyone but Tom, of course, and the conversation turned to Nelson's least favorite topic. "Nelson, you're such a good man. Haven't you thought of settling down?" asked Willa. "Why would he do a fool thing like that?" Tom chimed in. Thackeray laughed, Willa sighed, and Nelson swallowed. It was now or never. He had to tell someone before his bride arrived. "Well, funny you should ask, Willa. I don't mean to pry. I just think you'd be happy, seeing as you spend so much time out of your home now. But, if you had a special someone," Willa went on. "Yes, Nelson began. "Willa, let the man be," interrupted Thackeray. "Actually, I know, dear, and it doesn't hurt to ask. But still, give the man his privacy." Tom watched the conversation with great interest. This was the first disagreement he'd heard his new parents have, and it fascinated him. He sat back and let them work it out. When at last, each of them had said their piece, Nelson spoke up once again. "If I may?" "Of course," said Thackeray. "I'd love to hear your perspective on this," Willa added. "My bride arrives in 2 days." The room erupted in mutual chatter, backslaps, hugs, and then, condolences for Tom, who had promptly shouted, "Shucks," at the announcement. "This Margaret's doing?" asked Thackeray. "Sure is. And I couldn't be happier. Tell us about your gal." "I'd love to know. You'll bring her for Sunday dinners, right?" Nelson laughed. "She's beautiful. At least, she seems that way from her photograph. And she's educated and adventurous and downright sweet." Willa laughed with pleasure. "You'll bring her for Sunday dinners, won't you?" "Of course. How often we'll be up to her, you know." "Good man," said Thackeray. "That's a good way to be." Sally had ridden trains before, certainly, but not on trips this long. Her enthusiasm never waned, however. She shared a first-class compartment with a middle-aged couple who were headed to Chicago. They shared a mutual interest in travel. While Sally never told them her entire story, she did regale them with certain tales her grandfather had told her as a child. The husband was quite a few years older than his wife, and his clearly once handsome features were now hidden by a pudgy chin and belly. The wife was a lovely woman who was just beginning to lose her bloom. What made Sally enjoy them so was the fact that they obviously were still smitten with each other. "You've told us of your grandfather's travels, but what have you?" asked the wife. "I'm headed out west, to Nebraska." "Have you been there before?" asked the husband. "No. Have you?" "I'd love to know what it's like." The couple held each other's hands and gazed into each other's eyes. Then, the wife closed her eyes and seemed to let the memories flood over her as her husband explained. "Sally, every place in the world has its beauty and its hardships. Nebraska is home to prairies, crops, humidity, and plenty of sun. It's beautiful, but if you plan on farming, be prepared for heartache." "Why's that?" Drought, locusts, storms, and goodness knows what else. We tried to make a go of it early in life. It didn't work for us, but perhaps you will find your happiness there. I hope you do. It took us some years to recover, but since then, we've done well for ourselves. I'm not planning on farming. My fiancé is a banker. Oh my, you'll be just fine then, said the wife. You seem like a nice young lady. I wish you all the best, dear. It's going to be perfect, Sally assured her. Chapter 3. Nelson fidgeted with his lapel, collar, and handkerchief. He was never at such loose ends. He stood on the platform of the train station, waiting for the person who was hopefully the love of his life. The moments ticked away, but nothing happened. It was a well-kept station, made of brick and fairly large for a city of this size. After searching for something to look at and pass the time, Nelson began counting the spiders in the area. He studied one spider in particular, weaving its web down the side of the overhang. Then, he realized he must look quite foolish, staring up at something too small for others to see. With a sigh, he checked his pocket watch one more time. Why was it that when you wanted something to happen so badly, time stood still? He hadn't felt this way since he was a young boy. Another thing plagued him: not many people were standing alongside him, waiting. True, it wasn't a high-traffic day, but still. The arrival time came and went, but there was no sign of Sally or her train. He turned to a man standing behind him and asked him if he was waiting for the same train. Oh, well, I suppose I am now, aren't I? Say, you're that banker fellow, aren't you? I just arrived last week, and I'm waiting for my business partner. Oh. Starting a new apothecary in town. Thought this town needed us, but once I got here, I saw you already had a couple. We'll just have to be bigger and better. Shouldn't be a problem, he said with a sniff. Good luck to you, then, said Nelson. He shook the businessman's hand and steered the conversation to the incoming train once more. So, said Nelson, heard anything about the train? Is it delayed? Looks like. It sure does. Waiting and pacing did nothing to help, and neither did trying to get information out of this businessman, so Nelson made his way on the nearly empty platform to the station manager. The manager, Mr. Hodges, was a short, stout man with a red face. Many people were convinced it came from all the shouting he did. When Mr. Hodges saw Nelson, he dropped what he was doing and walked over to meet him. No more trains arriving here from any destination for a while yet, Nelson. Sorry. But surely there is another train scheduled to arrive. That one was delayed. Won't be another for 2 weeks at least. If you were expecting someone, you'll have to wait. She was supposed to be here. How do I find her? Maybe she sent you a telegram. Who is she? Nelson didn't let him finish. Instead, he was on his way to the exit and straight to the post office to see if there had been word. All the while, his heart raced so quickly, he thought it would burst through his chest. He had to know his love was safe and still on her way. Once he reached the post office, old Carl and his wife, Edna, were closing up for the day. He hollered at them just as they closed the door. Wait. Goodness, Nelson, you almost gave me a heart attack. Old Carl yelped. You know he's got a bad heart, said Edna. She put her hand on old Carl's back as if to protect him. I apologize, said Nelson between pants, I just needed to know. Why don't you catch your breath first? We'll still be here, said Edna. Nelson gulped an air. I needed to know if you had received any telegrams from me. It's important. Oh, well now, I don't recall seeing one. You know, we usually send them out as soon as they arrive, said old Carl. Got a fine young man to run those out. Let's take a look-see, just to be sure. What seemed a lifetime later, they entered the post office and the old couple went to work, searching through papers. Another lifetime later, they gave up. Sorry, Nelson. Don't look like it. What you looking for, just in case? Asked old Carl. Nelson filled them in with no more details than necessary and made his way out the door and onto the street. It was a Thursday, and normally, he headed to Steele and Dunlap's for supper, but that night, he had no appetite. Instead, he headed home. Sally was one determined woman. She had made it all the way to the last connection. There was one last train to catch directly to Landy City, but she was told there had been a mishap with the tracks. Until that was cleared, nothing would go through. Even then, another train wasn't due to leave for 2 weeks. As she stood on the platform of the small, wood-frame station with her bags about her, listening to the station manager, her face fell. "Surely there's another option, sir," she cried. "Someone is expecting me." "That applies to more than you, miss. Can't help it if you didn't plan for contingencies." The station manager turned away from her and made it apparent he was very busy. This would not do. She didn't come all this way to give up just because of a train mishap. Sally looked around the platform for anyone who might be helpful. A woman, only slightly older than herself, returned her gaze and beckoned her over. She was a tall, thin, tired-looking woman. It was obvious that the woman had done her best with what little money she had, but she and her young daughter were dressed in thin, worn dresses that had been hemmed and patched more than once. Sally had lived a sheltered life, but she knew the signs of poverty when she saw them. Being confronted with them made her slightly uncomfortable, but at the same time, there was something about this duo that drew her. "Are you stranded, too?" the woman asked. "Sorry, where are my manners?" "I'm Martha, and this here is my daughter, Eva." "I'm 5, said Eva. She seemed proud of this fact. Eva was small for her age. Her precocious, tiny face was like a porcelain doll and seemed just as fragile. Her eyes were set deep in her face, and her sparse, ashy hair enveloped her head like wisps of smoke. This child looked more spirit than human. "How do you do, Eva?" "I'm Sally." "Pleased to meet you," said Eva. Her intense gaze was almost unsettling to Sally, but Sally did her best to get past that feeling. "Martha, were you and Eva on your way to Landy City, too?" "I'm trying to find another way there, and I can't wait another 2 weeks or more." "I was hoping you'd say that," said Martha. "Grandpa and Grandma are there," added Eva. "I see. Well, we should do something about that, shouldn't we?" The girl nodded but did not smile. "I know my girl is a bit on the serious side. Always has been, ever since her little sister died. It was hard on all of us. Eva's my special baby now. I'm 5 now, Mama. I'm not a baby no more." "Right you are, love. Sally, I heard someone mention coaches. Perhaps we could share one to Landy City. I'm not one to give up easily. Let's go." The 3 of them made their way out of the station and into the sleepy town. Sally appraised their situation. The roads were made of packed mud and not much grew that she could see. She decided that must be why the town was so small. Likely, there were just enough people to support the trains coming through and little else. There appeared to be only one place to hire coaches. By the time they arrived, other passengers had cleared out every available conveyance. "Now what do we do?" "I don't have the money to get a hotel room, and even if I did, I heard there aren't any rooms left," said Martha. Sally sighed. "I don't know. We'll think of something." While the 2 ladies discussed their dwindling possibilities, Eva made her way over to an old man sitting in a chair by the side of the road. His stubble was pure white, his hat was over his eyes, and his feet were up on a railing as he leaned back. For all intents and purposes, he looked sound asleep. Eva stood off to his right and looked intently at him. It was hard to say what she found so intriguing, but her gaze eventually caught his attention. He grunted, pulled his hat back from his eyes and returned her stare. "Whatcha starin' at, little poke?" "What's a little poke?" "That's you." "Whatcha starin' at?" "Need somethin'?" "We need a ride," said Eva. "Don't give rides no more. Too old." Eva didn't break her gaze. Neither did he. "What's your name?" she asked. "Name's Ben." "I already know yours." little poke? That's right. Eva sighed. Very well. You're old, but we still need a ride. No one else is around. Is that so? Who you with? Them two ladies over there? Eva nodded. She didn't smile. I see. Where you headed? Landy City. Ben grumbled. Tell you what. I ain't in the habit of talking money from ladies in distress. S'pose you tell them you got a ride? I'll get ready. Just so you know, this'll be my last ride, little poke. I wouldn't do this for just anyone, you know. Chapter 4. As the days came and went, Nelson gave up on sleep just before the sun began to rise in the horizon. The only natural light was a red glow caused by the early harvests. It was pretty, but the color caused him to shudder. He prayed it wasn't a bad omen as he sat out on his porch, drinking his coffee. The farmers were probably out in force already, tending to their animals. Sounds of life filled the early morning air as Nelson peered out into the new day. It felt so helpless, not knowing where Sally was nor if she was all right. He knew better than to build anxiety-filled scenarios. Instead, he would visit the post office throughout the day. If he didn't hear anything by evening, he'd visit Sheriff Thackeray to see if he'd gotten word of anything. There was little else to do. But it didn't mean he had to like it. He forced himself to stay put, let his coffee go to work, and take in the scenery. Nelson purposely had his home built on the outskirts of Landy City a few years before. It gave him quick access to the town center, but he also had a sense of quiet. He had long thought it the best decision he'd made. That was, until he decided to marry Sally. It was a proper Victorian-style house, complete with gingerbread detail and a turret. He thought more than that would be too showy. Rather than painted in garish colors, as was the style in many parts, he kept the colors simple. Most of the house was just in shades of gray with just a touch of red. He loved his house, but even then, he was willing to be flexible for his bride and would let Sally make any changes she felt necessary. After a couple of hours passed, he finished getting ready and headed over to the bank. It was the pattern of his life, and it gave him comfort. Unfortunately, that day, it just didn't feel the same. On his way to the bank that morning, Nelson picked up his pace and headed straight for the post office. It hadn't been open for long, but he just couldn't wait. Once inside, he spoke with old Carl. Back already? You must really want your message, Nelson? Why don't you tell me who it's from? May help, you know. May help you snoop, Nelson teased. All right, I'll tell you. It's from Sally, my future bride. She's on her way out here. She was supposed to be on the train yesterday, but it didn't run after all, and there won't be another for a while. And you're worried your bride got cold feet? Nelson cleared his throat. He'd been afraid of reactions like this. Not worried about that, no. I'm worried for her safety. Just need to know where she is and that she's all right. Ah, I see. Tell you what, I'll humor you, said old Carl, digging again in the stacks on the counter. Don't you worry. I'll send word the minute I hear anything. No need to keep coming back. How's that sound? All right, but I can't guarantee I won't be back. Thanks, old Carl. Later that day, after closing time, Nelson headed over to Sheriff Thackeray's office at the city jail. Nelson's good friend had yet to let him down, and he was sure the sheriff would have good ideas in this case, too. The one and only time his bank had been robbed, Thackeray had been there within minutes and had found the robber within hours. Even so, when the robber faced his fate in county court, Nelson had written a letter to the judge, asking for mercy. It seemed the robber had been dealt a rough hand in life, and after consulting with Thackeray, they both decided the man could be rehabilitated. 3 years later, the man went to work for Nelson. Thackeray was on his feet when Nelson came in. I need some help, Nelson said, without preamble. Hey, Nelson, why don't you close the door, have a seat, and tell me all about it? Thanks, Thackeray. I'm worried. Sally's train never arrived. Station master said there isn't another one scheduled for at least 2 weeks. I haven't heard anything from her, so I'm asking you for help in finding her. Thackeray looked his friend in the eye before speaking. You sure she wants to be found? Old Carl suggested the same thing. Why does everyone assume that? I came to you for help. She could be in trouble. Robbed, hurt, sick, or worse. Couldn't live with myself if I didn't help her. Now, don't get defensive, my friend. It's the first thing I must ask. You need to consider that possibility, got it? I suppose. All right then. Tell you what, you just go about your life, and I'll do some investigating. See what I come up with. If I find out she doesn't want to see you, can you let it rest? I'd never pressure her. Not what I'm asking. Of course, Thackeray. I just want her to be happy. I'll let you know what I can. I'm sure she's just holed up somewhere waiting for the next train. Everything will be fine, Nelson. We'll do the right thing by her. They rose and shook hands. Nelson hadn't seriously considered the possibility that she didn't want to be found. But what if that was true? His heart sank. Even if it was, she'd completely captured his heart. Chapter 5. By the time the ladies were loaded and ready to go in a second-hand coach, it was already past midday. Ben sat in the driver's seat, and his horse, who looked as old as he was, started at a leisurely pace. Both Sally and Martha weren't so sure this was going to work, but Eva was confident in her chosen hero and had told him so. Ben's expression rarely changed. This was likely because his skin had been tanned like rough leather over the decades and any elasticity it once had was long gone. That, and he'd probably had little to smile about. Until he met Eva. The serious little girl had clearly done something to his weary heart. He appeared as though, once again, he had a purpose in the world. He told them that even though he never complained, he'd been in constant pain for the past 7 years, and it kept getting worse. His teeth were bad, his joints were worn out, his eyes were shot, and his blood circulation was so slow that his feet and hands were numb most of the time. But as they traveled toward Nebraska, the pain seemed to fade from his face, even though it tired him greatly. Nevertheless, he was once again doing what he loved. At the same time, the ladies inside the coach were just plain miserable. Whatever cushion the seats once had was gone, and the humid heat, albeit cooler than in the height of summer, made the cabin much too hot. To top it all off, there was nothing to mitigate all the bumps and dips in the road. This coach had seen better days, years ago. It wasn't long before the 2 grown women had very sore backsides. Eva, however, found the experience fascinating. This was her first ride in a coach, as there had never been money to hire one before. Even this novelty wasn't her main focus, though. She was seated next to her mother, facing the front so she could see Ben and his horse. She watched them like a mother hen. Ben had insisted on taking his old mare for his last run. The horse was slow, asthmatic, sway-backed, and ancient. He claimed she had been with him since she was born, and he wasn't about to abandon her now. Eva understood completely, of course, but the ladies had serious concerns about the old nag. The little girl felt it was her responsibility to keep the horse in good health through careful observation and worry. Martha knew enough to let her daughter have her obsessions. So, she turned to Sally for conversation when the sounds of the road weren't too deafening. How long is this going to take? At this pace, I'm afraid it will take far too long, said Martha. I am concerned about that, too. I dare say, the old horse might not make it. I don't know what we can do about it, though. Best to just sit back and wait, Sally replied. No use worrying ourselves sick. At least we're moving. Martha nodded, but she looked skeptical. Sally could tell life had given this woman fewer reasons to be optimistic. After all, for all of Sally's complaints, she had led a charmed life so far. I'm assuming we'll stop once the sun goes down. We've had to rest the horse so many times now, I've lost count, and I can't imagine he can ride all night, not since this is a long trip, said Martha, as she eyed the wheezing mare. You're probably right. Goodness knows, I could use a break from sitting in here. The hours passed, and the conversation dropped away. They did break for camp that night, and Ben fixed them beans with slabs of bacon. He fell asleep promptly, but the ladies couldn't do so very easily, least of all, Eva. None of them had slept out in the open like this before, and the sounds of nature were a bit too much. The ladies passed the time whispering to one another about their hopes for the future. What takes you to Landy City, Sally? True love. Sally sighed. I know that look, even in the near dark. You're smitten, aren't you? How long have you known each other? Where did you meet? This will be the first time we've met. Martha sat up in her bedroll and scooted closer to Sally. Never met before? Then how do you know you're in love? Well, Sally began, I did something scandalous. I became a mail-order bride, of all things. She watched her companion for a reaction. There was nothing more than a slight widening of Martha's road-weary eyes. Sally continued. I wanted adventure, but I wanted someone to share it with me. You should have read the letters other bachelors sent. Oh, Lord bless them and the women who end up with them. Martha narrowed her eyes at this and gasped in both astonishment and amusement. Sally took great delight in telling the story of burning the last letter while Martha stifled a giggle. Their interaction succeeded in taking their minds from the struggles they'd had so far in their journey. But you haven't told me your fiancé's name yet, Martha insisted. Who is he? What does he do? What does he look like? Sally sat up and rummaged through her pack. The rest of her bags were all piled on the coach, of course, but there were some necessities she couldn't be without. She pulled out the one picture she had of Nelson and handed it to Martha. Martha squinted her eyes in the darkness, but she was impressed. Nelson was good-looking by nearly anyone's standards. Oh my, Sally. I'm just newly out of my widow's weeds, and he makes even my heart race. Sally grinned widely. That's only one reason I love him. More importantly, he was looking for a free spirit. That suits you perfectly. Martha laughed. Tell me, is he a wealthy farmer? That's a nice suit. He's a banker. Can you believe it? Margaret Roberts, my matchmaking agent, said he has a reputation in town for kindness and charity. It shows in his letters, too. But, oh, Margaret, I just realized you said you're a widow, and it hasn't been long. I'm so sorry. Is that why you're headed out here? Martha nodded. All the light left her face. Sally felt instant regret at bringing up the subject, so she reached out her hand to her new friend. They fell asleep that way. The two women on the road, holding one another's hands for strength and comfort. Early the next morning when Ben awoke, he noticed he had company. Eva had moved her bedroll over to him and had been sleeping between him and the fire. The first smile of the day crackled on his face. He stood up carefully, trying not to wake her, and gently patted her head. You're the darndest kid, little poke. She stirred, looked up at him, and smiled right back. Go back to sleep, little poke. You need the rest. He pulled her covers up around her chin to keep out the morning chill and set about making breakfast and coffee for the adults. Eva kept smiling as she watched him. Later, after they had eaten some hard biscuits with steaming coffee, Martha pulled Ben aside. With tears in her eyes, she explained to him, my husband died of the same fever that killed our baby. I think you just gave Eva a whole lot of comfort. Thank you. Ben looked down and shuffled his worn boots. Never had kids of my own. Never had time on the road. She's real special. The next few days were filled with the same thing, riding slowly all day with many breaks for the horse, and camping at night. Some days, it felt as though they made no progress at all. All the while, Sally kept her spirits up by thinking of her fiancé and her papa. Her grandfather's pocket watch hung from her waist as it always had, and she never failed to keep it wound. Her papa was looking out for her, of that, she was certain. Even so, Sally's true motivation for reaching Landy City was her husband-to-be. Every time they set up camp for the night, Sally would read one of Nelson's letters to remind her of his love. The folds of the papers were growing weak from the many times she opened and closed the letters. Soon, she knew she would have a box of memories to place these in. Better yet, she would have the real Nelson in their place. Sally dreamt of what it would be like when they met. His big, strong hands would hold her close to his heart, so close, she would hear his heart beating. And then, she would look up into his blue eyes, run her fingers through his dark hair, and it just didn't seem right, thinking of such things while in the company of a woman and her daughter who had lost so much, but Sally found her mind wandering of its own accord, just the same. It was their 6th day on the road when the coach began to swerve uncontrollably. Eva called out in alarm, "Ben! Something's wrong, Mama." Sally put her head outside the cabin, only to see Ben slumped in his seat. Something was indeed very wrong. The last thing they needed to do, however, was panic. She turned back to Martha and Eva. Sally took it upon herself to keep them calm, and she did her best until the coach came to a halt with a shuddering jolt. Then, Ben fell to the ground. Eva was out of the cabin and by his side before either of the ladies could stop her. Her tiny hands shook him as her face screwed up in a panic. Martha rushed to calm her daughter while Sally tried to figure out what had happened. Ben's skin was uncharacteristically pale, and it had an ashen gray cast to it. At first, he wasn't responsive at all, but the third time Sally shook him, he opened his eyes and moved his mouth. "Save your energy, Ben," said Sally. "We'll make camp here and try to help you." It wasn't easy, but the ladies did their best to prop up Ben, so he could breathe a little easier. Sally tied up the horse and gathered the supplies they would need, while Martha tended to him directly. Eva wouldn't leave his side. As evening came, Ben's breathing became more and more labored. Sally didn't want to say anything, but she'd seen this happen before. It wasn't a good sign. After a great deal of convincing, Eva ate a little supper before returning to her post. Ben hadn't spoken for some time, and neither Martha nor Sally were sure if he could. They got ready for bed, and Sally took the first watch of the night over the old man. She began to nod off when she heard Eva crying. It was happening. "Dear heart, I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do for him. At least he has you with him right now. But he'll be all right, won't he?" "Oh, Ben." Eva broke into an open sob. Ben seemed to rouse himself out of his stupor at the sound. "Little Poke," he managed to croak. "Listen." Eva stopped crying and watched him closely. "Glad I met you, Little Poke. Bye, now." With that, Ben slipped away. Eva stopped crying and lay her head on his chest. Sally knew better than to move her just yet. The 5-year-old girl needed time to mourn. Again. Chapter 6. As the days passed, Nelson grew more and more tense. Sheriff Thackeray discovered that Sally had indeed been on the train to Spitfire, Iowa. She was supposed to catch the final leg there to Landy City, Nebraska, but the train wasn't running. That was all he knew, and it wasn't very helpful. Thackeray did his best to convince his friend that Sally had changed her mind, and that one day, he'd receive a letter from her, but Nelson couldn't let it rest. The search obsessed him. Again and again, he sent telegraphs to Spitfire and the surrounding area, asking after her. 6 days after Sally was supposed to arrive in Landy City, a very scruffy Nelson made his way to the post office once again. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Children too young to help in the fields were running around, playing tag. Old ladies stood about, gossiping. Old gents gossiped, too, but that was not what they would have called it. Ordinarily, Nelson made a point to greet all the people, but his cheerful exterior had faded. A widow nudged her friend and whispered, "There goes Nelson. I hear he was jilted." Her companion squinted and said, "Makes no sense to me. Good provider, nice man. She's a fool." If Nelson heard them, he gave no indication. Besides, he was too focused. Once he entered the post office, old Carl waved a message in the air at him. "Nelson. I was just about to send for you," he called out. "Guess what I found? It was buried under the newspapers Edna stacked on my desk." I've told her 100 times not to do that. Carl, what is it? Did someone reply? Well, no. Nelson's face fell. Let me finish. Goodness, you young people have no patience. Gotta let me finish before you get all upset. Just common sense. It took all of Nelson's endurance not to say anything. He'd known the old postmaster as long as he'd been in Landy City. In recent years, the man had begun to fade, his body, memory, and his ability to think had all declined. When there was a pause in the postmaster's rambling, Nelson interjected, "You had a message for me?" "Oh, so I did. I think you'll like this one." He handed it over to Nelson. By the time Nelson finished reading the staccato language, he had fallen back, leaning heavily against the wall behind him. Sally's message told him she'd caught the last possible coach from Spitfire, and most importantly, that she loved him. He sighed deeply, a cloud of relief falling over him. His love was true. And she was headed his way. Old Carl smiled, though confused, as Nelson shook his hand so hard, the old postmaster's jowls jiggled uncontrollably. "I take it, you did like the news then? Sorry you didn't get it sooner. Guess your gal should be here any moment, eh? That's the sum of it. I'll let Thackeray know." Nelson's old smile returned. As he walked back through town, the gossip turned to curiosity. Some said he'd found a new love, while others said he'd lost his mind. He didn't care. It had been over a week since he'd been himself. It was nice to be back. Thackeray was pleasantly surprised and invited his friend to a weeknight supper as a celebration. It would be a welcome diversion. People at the bank noticed a distinct difference, as well. The Nelson they had known for years had made a sudden comeback, and it was welcomed with smiles and greetings. That night, Nelson headed over to the Thackeray household. He shaved and wore a fresh shirt. Willa was the first to comment as he came inside. "My goodness, that's the Nelson we know and love. Thackeray told me the good news. We're so happy for you." Young Tom wasn't so impressed. "Don't see what the fuss was all about. She's just a lady. Probably smells good, too. Don't let her make you take a bath." "Ladies love to do that," grumbled Tom. "I thought you didn't mind baths now," said Nelson as he sat down at the table. "Isn't Willa nice about it?" "Yeah, she's all right. It's the other ones you gotta look out for." The adults erupted into laughter. Tom shrugged and busied himself with carving a piece of wood while sitting on the floor. "Tom, you need to put that away and clean up for supper," said Thackeray. Tom sighed and stood up. Once supper was over, Nelson began to speak about Sally. He hadn't really expressed what he felt out loud to anyone. It was nice to be more open about it, if a little uncomfortable. To put him more at ease, Thackeray sent Tom on an errand. This cut down on the commentary quite a bit. Willa asked, "What do you love most about her?" "You haven't met yet, of course, but going by what you know now." "Hard to say." "Why? Is it hard to think of something you love?" "Oh, no. It's a matter of narrowing it down. Like I told you before, Sally's beautiful, even though I've only seen a picture. But I don't mean just her looks. She's so sweet in her letters. And she's full of hopes and dreams, seems real spirited. I can't wait to have her by my side." "You are besotted, aren't you?" Willa asked with a knowing smile. "I just know she and I will be friends. I hope for both your sakes that she turns up sooner rather than later." "I'm counting on it," said Nelson. "My heart can't take another scare like before." Late that night, long after the sun had set and most everyone was sound asleep, Nelson hummed a tuneless melody to himself. Eventually, he fell asleep in his wingback chair as he sat beside the window, dreaming of his love. Chapter 7. Digging was hard work, especially when there was only one shovel. It took some time, but eventually, Sally had created a space large enough for a grave. They piled up the stones Martha had gathered on the top for good measure. It was the best they could do. Poor Eva hadn't said a word to anyone since the poor man passed away, and Martha said that she feared her daughter would never want to speak again. The next morning, in an effort to give Eva a sense of closure, Martha sent her off to pick prairie flowers for the grave, but there weren't too many still in bloom at that time of year. They held a solemn ceremony, ate a quick breakfast, and packed up camp. The rest of the trip was up to them, as no one else was around for miles. Sally gave the outward impression of confidence and courage, but inside, she was just as frightened as Martha. She didn't know which way to go, not really, but it wouldn't do to just sit out there on the prairie, waiting to die. One thing that had always helped her with her fears were her grandfather's stories. Many were the times he found himself lost, and yet, he consistently found a way. The other thing that urged her forward was her love for Nelson. It wouldn't be long before he knew something was wrong, and he was bound to send help. These two thoughts kept her from breaking down altogether. The three of them didn't make much progress that day, as the horse was unaccustomed to a different hand at the reins. They had to make more and longer stops than before. In reality, this wasn't such a bad thing. It did give Sally a chance to figure out what to do next. No one said anything, but everyone acted worried about losing the horse on top of everything else. The old mare was no filly, and her worsening wheezes set them all on edge. At the close of their second day while they were setting up camp, Sally noticed Martha wasn't her usual self. She looked pale and tired. Sally convinced her to sit by the coach and rest. "You'll be no good to any of us if you get sick," she said. "I suppose you're right." That night, Martha didn't have much of an appetite, but she did her best to eat. Even though they were all city girls, after the days and nights they had spent on the road, they'd gotten used to life in the wild, somewhat. Even the sound of coyotes, too frightened of fire to come very close, no longer kept them awake. Before long, all three of them fell asleep. When morning came, Martha appeared worse. Her cheeks were flushed bright red. While she didn't complain, she kept shivering, and it was easy to see she had a fever. They needed to cover more land and reach Landy City soon, or Sally feared what might happen. Neither of the ladies voiced their concerns when Eva could overhear. No need to further traumatize her. Although, the child was hardly blind and no doubt knew something was wrong. But Sally bundled Martha into the seat with a blanket and simply told Eva that her mother needed a bit of rest. Sally made extra tea for Martha to sip on as she could. However, to make matters worse, the poor horse couldn't manage a decent pace. Whenever Sally would try to push the old mare, she ended up having to stop more frequently and for a longer time. In the end, Sally decided slow progress was better than none and eased up on the reins. More than once, Sally prayed for a miracle. How could things possibly get worse? It was best to press on and not dwell on imagined possibilities. She only hoped and prayed they were headed in the right direction. Yet, it felt as though they became more and more lost with each passing day. She had whispered conversations with Papa to think of ideas. Oh, what she wouldn't give to have his compass with her. Even then, she wasn't sure in which direction Landy City lay. That was at the heart of the problem. Eventually, when their plight was obvious even to Martha, the decision was made to backtrack to see if that might help. At least then, they would be on an established route. Perhaps inspiration would come to them there. It took Sally 3 more days to get back to where they had buried Ben. Discouragement and fear threatened to overtake Sally's heart when they arrived back to the grave. Their food was nearly gone, and if not for the grass the horse had grazed on and the occasional stream they'd crossed, they wouldn't have made it as long as they had. A tiny wail erupted from Eva inside the coach. Poor child. Perhaps they shouldn't stop it there, Sally thought. She decided to take off in a different direction from the last time, putting distance between them and Ben's grave, praying that this time, they would head closer to Landy City. Sally had just begun to turn the wagon when Eva cried out once again, but this time, she said, "Mama." "Oh, Mama." Sally's blood ran cold. She said a quick prayer before jumping down and running back to the cabin. Eva's face was white. Her thin little hands were grasping at her mother's clothes, shaking her with all her small might. Martha wasn't responding. Sally gasped and climbed inside. At least Martha's cheeks had some color in them. Granted, They were only faintly pink, but there was no trace of gray. The poor child must be calmed, and her mother must be tended. There would be no more travel today. Eva, sweetheart, I need you to help me with your mama. Is she? But before the child could break down in fresh sobs, Sally put her hands on the girl's shoulders. Your mama is alive. She's just very sick. That's why I need you to help me. Could you do that? Eva nodded vigorously. Doing her best not to frighten the child any further, Sally felt Martha's forehead, but said nothing. She gave the girl specific instructions. There was a creek nearby for the horse. It was the girl's duty to gather up what spare rags they had and keep them cold and damp from the creek. Between those times, she was to sit with her mother and keep her company. In truth, Eva's little forehead, too, was growing warmer every time Sally checked her. She was coming down with whatever her mother had. It would only be a matter of time before she joined her mother, propped up against the coach, oblivious to her surroundings. Sally didn't expect the girl to make more than one trip to the creek. But it gave her the time she needed to set up camp, make Martha comfortable by stripping her down to her nightdress and setting her up in her bedroll. It took every bit of Sally's strength not to break down and sob as Eva had. Where, was Nelson? Surely, he was out looking for her by now. She prayed with all her might that his strong, handsome figure would appear through the prairie grasses by morning. As she looked down on her grandfather's watch, her eyes began to tear up. Sorry, Papa. I've failed. Guess I'm not the adventurer you were. Chapter 8. The next 2 days came and went, and still, Nelson saw no sign of Sally. His cheerful countenance was once again replaced by lines of worry across his forehead. What could be keeping her? Any coach driver worth his salt would have delivered her there by now. Several other coaches had come and gone during that time, and none of the drivers had any helpful information. One driver did say he thought he saw a red-headed lady, but she was with another woman and a little girl. The driver added, she wasn't the only redhead in town that day. Lots of 'em out this way. Nelson smiled faintly, nodded, and thanked the man. What he thanked him for, he wasn't sure, but it seemed polite. His appetite had gone down to nothing, and he didn't bother to go out for supper, choosing to sit on a bench just outside the train station. He had a good view of the coming coaches from there. His eyes were scratchy from lack of sleep, and he was becoming more and more restless. Even his work suffered. Nelson was never known to take any days off, not since he'd arrived in town, anyway. Now, it had been nearly a week since he'd darkened the bank entrance. No one complained, of course, but the town gossips had a field day. The same widow who had commented on him earlier stood by her companion in the town square. The ladies kept looking over at him, this time with genuine concern. Poor boy. I've never seen a case of lovesickness this bad, said the widow with a shake of her head. Neither have I. What would you know? You're a spinster. Thank you for reminding me. I might have forgotten, snapped the woman. I'm sorry, dear, it's just that I'm so worried about our banker. The concept of offering concerns or a home-baked pie never occurred to these two. Their unhappy worlds were far too small for such a gesture. In the meantime, Nelson found himself dreaming of his beloved Sally. The next day was Sunday, and it was time for church services. Nelson dressed up in his Sunday best, like all the townsfolk did. Just because his heart was troubled, didn't mean he could shirk his spiritual life. He found himself in prayer more often, and the topic was almost always Sally. Where was she? Was she all right? When would she arrive? By the time Nelson arrived at the picturesque country church, he was thoroughly troubled in spirit. Something had to be done, of that, he was certain. The time for sitting and waiting had long passed. The service was fine, as usual. Old Mrs. Johnson was singing loudly and slightly off-key in her wavering soprano voice, and old Mr. Johnson sang just as loud in his nasally tenor. Some people found their sounds atrocious, but Nelson found them reassuring, like the sound of an old hound baying at your side. A young girl and her beau sat in pews across from each other, making moon eyes at one another whenever their parents weren't watching. Mrs. Doe struggled to live up to her name. She was the most fertile woman in town, and had just given birth to her 10th child in as many years. Needless to say, she had her hands full, even though 3 of them had died in infancy. No one knew her well, since she hadn't much time to socialize. There were quite a few farmers who took the time away from their fields just 1 day a week, and that was for church. Even then, during the height of the harvest, it wasn't unusual to see less than half of them there. As for Nelson's friends, he often sat with the Thackeray's. Tom Thackeray was thoroughly unimpressed with the length of the minister's sermon and began asking Sheriff Thackeray questions halfway through. This made Willa blush bright crimson, not because the boy was curious, but because of his chosen subject matter. For some reason, Tom was fascinated by bosoms at the moment, and he didn't yet understand why it wasn't a subject fit for polite company. When the service concluded, there was a brief social hour, featuring some homemade treats. This had long been a contest between the few women in town and a fair number of men as well. The minister had given up trying to teach his flock that social hour was an extension of church services, and as such, should not be given to comparing the merits of different treats. In more recent years, he had finally joined them as he delved into his fair share of pies, cakes, and sweet breads with gusto. While the harvest hadn't quite gone into full swing, it still affected the length of their get-together. In off times, when farmers weren't busy tilling, planting, or harvesting, the socializing often included full picnics with most people bringing their own main dishes and a little something to share. This Sunday, however, Nelson was far too disturbed to indulge in sweets or even socializing. Margaret Roberts, his field agent from Heavenly Dove's matchmaking service and fellow citizen of Landy City, came up to him right away. "I've been watching you for a few days now," she announced quietly. He stared at her. "Hello there, Margaret. I was just brooding. I could tell. Everyone can tell. I noticed Sally isn't here yet, and I've heard the gossip." "What have you heard?" "Nothing you'd want to hear, believe me. That's not why I'm here. Care to walk with me? Will Lawrence mind? Should he come along? He's fine. He knows all about it. No secrets between this husband and wife, you know." Margaret gave him a smile. Nelson made a pathetic attempt to respond in kind. When they were out of earshot from the others, she stopped and faced him. "Oh dear, it is bad, isn't it?" she asked. "I want to hear it from you, as my client. What happened?" "I haven't heard a word from Sally." Nelson sighed and showed her Sally's telegram to him. It had been neatly folded in his pocket. Margaret read it, but it only served to make her more confused. "But that doesn't explain. I don't know why she still isn't here, Margaret. The wait is killing me. All I know is she took the last available coach, and no one saw her after she sent this." He lifted the telegraph in his hand. "And I'm sick and tired of waiting and doing nothing." He gave her an earnest look. "But Margaret, what if the others are right? What if she did change her mind and didn't have the heart to tell me? She may have taken the coach right back to where she came from." Margaret looked him square in the eye, pulled a letter out of her pocket, put it in his other hand, and said, "Read this. She sent this to me just before catching the train to come out west. I've only just received it yesterday. I have no idea why it was delayed. Read it, and then tell me if you still question her love. I'll be sitting over there, with the others." With that, she left him alone with the mysterious letter. It took him a moment to unfold it, but he would never forget what it said. "Margaret. I'm sending this as I board the train to my destiny. I shall soon be Mrs. Thatcher. I keep telling myself this fact, over and over, and yet it still feels as though I'm dreaming. Oh, never have I been so happy in my life. Nelson is everything I ever hoped for. He said he's looking for a free spirit. That was the first thing that won my heart. You've no idea what that meant to me. He also said he was looking for a kindred soul. I, too, have looked for that very thing. If we aren't kindred souls, I don't know who is. Of course, it doesn't hurt that he is the handsomest man I've ever seen. At least, according to his photograph. Nothing in this world could keep me from my love. I shall see you all soon. Sally. Tears welled up in his eyes as he swallowed past a lump in his throat. Now was the time for action. He'd been a fool not to take action sooner. She needed him now, not someday, now. No one could make him doubt any longer. He marched over to the social gathering and got everyone's attention. My friends, you've known me for some years now. You've let me into your lives and hearts. It's no secret that I haven't been myself lately. I no longer fear what others will say. My lovely bride, Sally Wilhelmsen, should have been here by now. The last leg of her train was cancelled, and I know for a fact that she took the last coach out of Spitfire to Landy City. Something has happened, and I'm heading out now to find her. There's a lot of ground to cover. If you wish to help, so be it. If not, so be it. But I'm going. As he turned away, he heard the sound of wooden benches scraping the ground. When he looked back, several men, young and old, were on their feet and ready to go. Sheriff Thackeray said, "We need to be organized about this. Let's meet by my office, and we'll arrange search parties." Chapter 9. Sally was exhausted. She had no idea what day it was any longer, or what would become of them. Still, she kept her eyes on the horizon. Something in her heart told her not to lose hope. Their situation had gone from bad to worse. Martha hadn't spoken for hours, and she faded in and out of consciousness. Eva wasn't much better. Sally kept plenty busy, changing their clothes, fetching water for the rags to wash and soothe, and cleaning up after them. At the same time, she was mindful of the old mare, and made sure the horse had enough to drink and fresh pasture to eat when she had cleared out too much where she stood. Then, there was making what little tea that was left, and stretching out the remaining cornmeal for herself and just tiny bits for the others, should they show an interest. Nevertheless, all the stress and lack of sleep was getting to her. Eva cried in the night, sometimes calling for her mama or even Ben. The sound struck Sally right in the heart, and she would drag herself out of bed, no matter how tired she was, to comfort the child back to sleep. In those few blessed hours she did have to sleep, she found herself dreaming of life with Nelson, only to awaken again to the sounds of Eva's cries. Finally, on what she figured might be Sunday evening, Sally began to crack. It was all too much for her. Where was her papa? Where was Nelson? Where was her faith? She looked down at her pocket watch and contemplated throwing it across the prairie out of frustration. It was when she got to her feet, watch in hand, her arm back in a throwing position, that she saw something. Something moving. Something that hadn't been on the horizon minutes earlier. She cried out, and in a burst of excitement and new energy, she strained her eyes. And then, in exultation, she jumped up and down and waved her arms frantically. "Nelson! Nelson, is that you?" Oh, it had to be. It simply had to be him. "Dear Lord above, you haven't forsaken us. Papa, you were watching over us. Oh, I'm so sorry." Sally's energy deserted her as quickly as it came. She broke down and sobbed. For the first time on the road, she let go of all control and wept, hot tears splashing down her face. More than anything, she wanted to keep waving and hollering, but she was simply too tired. As the group of riders drew close, she collapsed where she stood. Nelson was overcome with conflicting emotions, joy at finding his love, worry at the state of what he saw, and guilt for having waited so long. As it turned out, had Sally taken a straight line north from where she was, she could have been in town in just a handful of hours, instead of days. All the same, no one knew. Least of all, him or Sally. He caught her up in his arms and held her close. There was no mistaking that it was her. He would have recognized her anywhere. Her beauty overwhelmed him, even in her present state of exhaustion and hunger. Once he had secured her on his horse, the rest of the party evaluated the camp. It was clear to everyone just how tough the woman he loved really was. By the time all three unfortunates were resting comfortably in Landy City, their story had been told and retold a dozen times. In fact, their adventures were quickly becoming something of a legend in town. During the days that followed, Nelson liked to remind Sally of this. He told her that someday she could regale her grandchildren with the tale. Sally gave him a weary smile. "Let's get married first, and then worry about grandchildren. How's that?" He laughed. "My precious Sally, of course we will. And as soon as possible." His face grew somber. "Will you ever forgive me, Sally?" She blinked up at him. "For what?" "For not coming to find you immediately. I was a fool, and I don't think I'll ever forgive myself. I doubted you. I doubted us. Never again. I promise you that. Never again will I doubt our love. Please, forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive, Nelson. You did find me." "I did. But not soon enough." He smoothed her hair from her forehead and gazed at her intently. "Our wedding. Shall we make plans?" Sally leaned her head back on the bench and sighed softly. It felt so good to safe and happy again. "I haven't any family out here, you know. So, I won't have any guests to invite. But there is something I want. I want Martha to be my matron of honor, and don't you think Eva would make a dear little flower girl?" Nelson gave her a tender smile and brushed her cheek with his knuckles. "For you, anything," he murmured. "Now, eat your soup. You must become good and strong first." "For you, anything," she echoed his words and picked up her spoon. He leaned close and touched her mouth with his. His lips were soft and cool and gentle. "Soon," he whispered. "Soon, you'll be mine. And then, we'll be together forever." "Together forever," she repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." And then, she took a spoonful of soup. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.